Hi guys, so we're going to look at, again, just in my opinion, why I think, Professor Stuart McGill's Big Three is usually a great start for most people, but not all. And it's certainly, if you're on your path to building a strong, robust and pain-free back, I definitely think, a good goal to have to get that outcome is to sort of master those three exercises or some sort of variation of, because there are some variations. So first of all, what we're talking about, so Stuart McGill's Big Three. It's a series of 3 exercises. He deems them non-negotiable for those with lower back issues. If you want to have a pain-free back, you need to get, he says, sort of competent, I would say master those exercises or variants thereof. So what are those exercises? Well, we've got a McGill curl, which is a very deceptive small movement, which is all about you learn to use your brace and you learn to use your obliques correctly, but a tiny movement. Then we've got our side bridge, which is them sort of protecting you from uncontrolled lateral or side to side movement, which can be very aggravating for some people. And then thirdly, we've got like bird dogs and their variations, and that's to sort of protect you from twisting movements or learning to, control twisting movements, I should say. So why are they a good start, and kind of what's the sort of the science and the reasoning behind them. So if anyone's familiar with Professor Stuart McGill's work, you know that those exercises aren't just like a happy accident. He's spent a lot of time studying various different core exercises and making subtle changes to them, and having people hooked up to EMG machines to watch their muscle contractions and values. And basically the goal was to find exercises that would cover the sort of the most important foundations for a pain-free, stable back, but also we have to sort of balance risk versus reward. So we wanted the least riskiest, but also had to have a high return on investment in terms of if you mastered them, how much stronger it would make your core and your lower back and make it a lot more robust. So the kind of science behind it is if we think about, when we think about movement, we think about movement in 3 planes of movement. So, and again, the names are a little bit confusing, but if we think about, basically sort of, if you think about forward and back movements, we've got side to side, and obviously then we've got twisting. So in terms of planes of movement, when we talk about front to back, it's actually because it's parallel to what we call the sagittal plane. So it's movements that are, when we talk about the plane, it's movements that are parallel to that plane, which gets a bit confusing because the first one's called sagittal, but it's actually front and back movement, or forward and back, I should say. Next one is frontal plane, which is actually looking at sideways movement, because sideways movement is parallel to a plane of movement in front of you, which gets confusing. And then the last one is what we call transverse, which is the rotation, twisting movements. Particularly what we're looking at there in terms of Stuart McGill stuff is how well you can control your shoulders with your hips at the same time. Because generally if they break apart from each other in an uncontrolled way, it's going to put a lot of work into your lower back and particularly onto your lumbar discs as well. So there's very particular injuries you can get from having too much of that uncontrolled movement, and it sort of grinds into the discs and causes very particular sort of damage to the disc. So you want to protect from that, but also if you're in that sort of pain phase, an uncontrolled twisting movement is really going to set your back off into a spasm for the rest of the day. So, we look at those 3 planes of movement, and then we have to create stability in the spine and the core along those 3 planes. So when we look at the first one, obviously we're looking at the sagittal plane, so that's forward and back movement, and that's what we're doing. We do a McGill curl. Again, it's a very deceptive exercise. It looks like, when you do it well, right, if you do a traditional one, I should say, a traditional McGill curl well, it looks like you're barely moving. Because the coaches I use to people is big brace, tiny movement off the floor, 3 deep breaths per rep. And what we're looking to do is to fire that brace up to give you stability forward and back. Something that would be, along the same lines of the planes of movement, what we do kind of the opposite thing is like a traditional sort of stomach crunch or sit up. Because you're generating a massive movement, you're actually teaching these muscles to be at their strongest by putting your spine into a flexed and it's kind of in its weakest, most likely to get aggravated state. So when we do a McGill curl, we want a tiny movement because we want to learn how to control that brace, without having to change your posture a great deal. We just want to lock our spine in its strongest, safest position and be able to maintain that strength. So for example, that's going to have a huge carryover to say, someone doing a squat, for example, if you've got 100 plus kilos on your back, you don't want to be doing like a stomach crunch, folding yourself in half to try and get these muscles to lock on. You just want to go and keep yourself nice and tight, which is what you'll see if you see, good powerlifters and strongmen. They use that sort of brace technique. One thing I would say in McGill curls is I wouldn't look at trying to hold your breath initially, because we're trying to work on the components of the obliques first. The holding your breath and creating intra-abdominal pressure will come later. So that's why when you do a rep, you take 3 big deep breaths, so you learn to use that brace on its own without trying to hold your diaphragm. And again, later on, you'll add it together. Okay, then we have obviously the side bridges, which is looking at movement along the frontal plane. So what we're trying to avoid there is what we call lateral flexion. So if there's one thing worse than normal flexion, excessive flexion for people, like rounding forward, it's being sort of rounded to the side, like buckled to the side. That's a big bugbear. People sit in the car or sit in an office chair, on a couch. It's not just the sort of being sat with a rounded posture that does them in. You usually find it kind of slightly buckled. One way to tell if you've got an issue with lateral flexion is if you generally have hip problems on one side, or if you roll your quads out, you'll have one side significantly tighter than the other, and that to me is a massive red flag that the back's very unstable and it's on the brink of a big episode, unless we sort of do the right things to kind of calm it down and nip it in the bud. And then obviously we've got the rotational movements. So again, bird dog's great for that, because especially the level 2 where you lift the arm and the leg up. So now you've got to make sure that the shoulders and the hips stay in alignment, because as soon as you lift those bases of support away, you just want to sort of drop your shoulder or kind of shift your weight one way or the other. And when you do that, basically the work will go into your lower back. But if you can maintain a solid brace, again, still able to breathe and hold that position, almost like you're a table, like you just take 2 legs away the table, but you can make sure it doesn't move. It just stays nice and flat and level. Again, that's a great base for sort of rotational stability. Protecting yourself from those sort of transverse movements, which again, very important. So overall, what we're doing, the McGill curls, they're, if we think about risk versus reward, a very low risk for very high reward, so long as you're methodical with technique. In the 3 planes of movement we look at, and we're trying to create, 3-dimensional stability in the spine. And that's what should be your goal. If you want a strong, robust spine, it needs to be stable in different directions. And if you've got that base and that foundation, then we can add more stuff on. So it's not certainly, for most people, I wouldn't say to them, that's the only 3 exercises you need to do. It's a great start, again, for most, but not all. Some people need to do other stuff, even to be able to do like a McGill curl correctly. I might need to do some sort of, base work to get them there. But for most, I think as a good goal, if you can master those 3 exercises and their variations, I think you've got a solid foundation upon which then you can build, athletic performance, strength, just generally returning to sport, or just having good pain-free movement day to day. You need that base then. Again, it's when I really believe in using those tools, because if, I treat exercise like my toolbox. Every exercise has to do its job. And those for me, for the right people at the right time, are 3 of my most effective tools that I've got to hand. Again, as long as they're applied correctly, and they really help people come on leaps and bounds, especially in those initial stages. So yeah, the McGill Big 3 is a very worthwhile looking into and kind of getting the basics of and trying to master. And then from there we can get more complicated and add in more stuff that you want to do. But yeah, McGill Big 3 from me, massive thumbs up. Use them all the time, and they've helped me get tremendous results for clients. More so than most other sort of traditional sort of rehab type exercises. So yeah, very worthwhile goal to pursue. So yeah, you should be doing, if you've got back pain now, I would look to sort of learn how to do them, start to master them, and that really will dig you out of trouble very, very quickly.